We start with Fidel Castro, as controversial in death as he was in life.
Exactly. We want to show you some contrasting front pages here. This is from a pro-Castro paper in Cuba. The headline reads, "Toward victory always, Fidel." And this is the front page of the Miami Herald with just one word: dead.
And we want to show you some scenes that could not be any more different. They were partying in the streets overnight in Miami's Little Havana neighborhood for a second straight night. This as some prominent Republicans are lashing out at President Obama for allegedly, quote, showering love on Castro in his official White House statement.
So many questions swirling right now about the future of Cuba and the future of America's relationship with Cuba. We have team coverage this morning, and we're going to begin with ABC's Jim Avila, who's on the ground in Havana. Jim, good morning to you.
Good morning, Dan and Paula. Cubans on both sides of the Florida Straits have been waiting 40 years for this day. Rumors always fly about Fidel's death, some hoping his demise would lead to another revolution here. But there's no sign of that. It's all quiet, subdued, nothing spontaneous in view as the island waits for Monday's services to say its long goodbye. This morning, the Cuban flag flying at half-staff in Havana as the country begins an official 9 days of mourning for Fidel Castro. Students at the University of Havana, where their education is free, apparently overcome with emotion. This Cuban woman calling the revolutionary leader's death painful, saying Castro helped the people. Sentiments echoed by one of the country's most famous young men, Elian Gonzalez, once the center of an international custody battle between the U.S. and Cuba.
Fidel began to be that father like all who start off as fathers. But the difficult thing is for a father to become a friend.
The news announced by Fidel's brother Raul on state television late Friday night. Castro's body is set to be cremated and his ashes taken on a 3-day journey across the country before his burial on December 4th. A service Fidel's estranged sister Juanita Castro, who lives in the U.S., will not be attending. On Saturday, Castro dividing world leaders in death as he did in life. This morning, President Obama under fire from conservatives for not including a single reference to Castro's record of human rights abuses in his 200-plus words, in which he notes the enormous impact of this singular figure who altered the course of the Cuban nation. Some in the Cuban-American exile community in the United States, including Florida Senator Marco Rubio, calling the president's choice of words pathetic, a sentiment shared by Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who referred to Castro as a murderer and a thug. And President-elect Donald Trump calling Castro a brutal dictator, while promising to do all he can to ensure Cuba's prosperity and liberty. Now, back in the day, Castro was a firebrand, once delivering a 7-hour harangue against the U.S. But in the last decade, after severe stomach illness that left him frail, he rarely spoke in public and delivered only rambling essays in the state newspaper, still suspicious to the end of the Americans and the new era of diplomacy. Dan?
Jim Avila in Cuba for us this morning. The reaction in South Florida, radically different from what we've been seeing in Cuba. In Little Havana, home to so many people who fled Castro's regime, celebrations and hope for a very different Cuba moving forward. ABC's Gio Benitez is in Miami with that part of the story. Gio, good morning to you.
Dan, good morning. These celebrations are filled with passion because so many people here were forced to leave their homeland some 50 to 60 years ago.
This is the epicenter of America's Cuban exile community, Florida's Little Havana. Hundreds taking to the streets, some taking to their balconies, banging pots, making noise to celebrate a turning page in Cuban history.
These people here are marching with that giant Cuban flag, chanting, "Cuba yes, Castro no." For them, this is about hope for the future of Cuba.
It's something like goosebumps. And I'm not happy because somebody died. Death. It's not about that. It's about changing hope that something's going to happen.
Gladys Falcone left communist Cuba as a child, but many celebrating here were born in this country, their Cuban ancestors not living to see a Cuba without Fidel Castro.
I feel for people who lost loved ones, who did not see this, that's why I'm here. to honor those folks.
The passing of a man exiles considered a brutal dictator, offering a glimpse of hope, even as his younger brother still rules the nation and carries on many of the regime's practices toward dissenters and political prisoners.
Raul is as repressive, and they're not about to give up easily what they've had for nearly 6 decades.
Still, Cuban Americans hold on to that idea that someday the Cuba they once knew will be within reach.
We lost our country. Maybe we're gonna get it back now, soon, and I'm hoping for that.
And here in Little Havana, we can tell you that these celebrations happen in front of one legendary Cuban restaurant. It's called Versailles. This really became the heart of the Cuban exile community, where these exiles would come and talk about their pain and their strength, Paula.
But Gia, you can see the hope and relief on so many of their faces, and we're going to check in with you for some heartwarming stories a little bit later.